Hi, Tina Peters here.
See, today they go after you if you're investigating sort of thing.
The electoral systems of the United States can be manipulated by foreign agents or third parties.
Are you in danger, physical danger, if your true identity is known?
Yes, we configured the transmission systems and the tally systems. I was the national coordinator for voting machines.
You examined the forensic image of the election management server that was used in the Mesa County 2020 election, correct?
That's correct. They can use a virtual machine that is put in the middle. In the case of Mesa, Colorado, all evidence, all log, all of that was deleted. We saw both images, the old one and the new one. And the structure changed. The structure of the program changed as compared to the version 5.5. Whoever gave the authorization for the system to be updated would be the person responsible for all the files that were deleted.
And is the same true for Dominion software? It's easy to rig an election with it, and it's hard to audit.
That is correct. It can allow you to inject votes without people knowing you did so. When you audit an election or when you audit a system, you will be auditing only that which the company wants you to see or what the electoral body wants you to see. It is in Serbia that they develop the programs that are then implemented here in the United States. Dominion's software is a software that has a lot of errors or bugs. But the reason why those errors are intentionally there is because they need it.
I'm Apollo, and we're here for Tina Peters. I'm sitting here with the wonderful John Case. So, John, it's a pleasure to sit with you here today. But we have, of course, this transcript and a video that the audience is going to watch after we finish speaking here now. And this is some pretty interesting information that came from this witness who you sat down with for several hours. So I'll let you, introduce yourself and kind of cue this up. But I think this is pretty critical information to understand, especially as it relates to Tina Peters, given how many of these aspects to the motives behind her actions and the information that she was called a liar and a charlatan and a danger to the public for continuing to speak out on relates to her case and her sentencing, and certainly her being in prison still now, about a year later, while she has continued to be denied bail in a situation that just makes no sense in a free republic.
Well, thank you, Apollo. It's good to be with you. I'm a lawyer representing Tina Peters, and my job is to present evidence in court and to the public that is truthful and verifiable. So when I learned that there was a witness whose identity, image, and voice and whereabouts must remain confidential because he's being hunted by people who want to take him out because of what he knows, I jumped at the opportunity to go and have a recorded, sworn statement under oath from the witness. So I did that. And the purpose was to assist Tina in her efforts to be released on bond from incarceration in the Colorado Department of Corrections in Pueblo, where she's currently housed. She sleeps on a steel bunk with a 2-inch foam mattress between her and the steel. And she's in a unit with people who've been convicted of homicide and dealing drugs and all kinds of unmentionable things. And Tina had never had a traffic ticket before the government prosecuted her in order to shut her up because she was criticizing the voting system in Colorado. What I learned from this witness is that the software used on Dominion voting systems in Colorado has the same basic structure as the Smartmatic software that was used to rig elections in Venezuela. And the witness who testified to this was a government official in Venezuela whose job was to create the war rooms and situation rooms that were used to monitor the election results. And then when the time was ripe, to inject fake votes into the system so that the government candidate would always win.
Well, and I want to read just a piece so we cue this up. And I think most people don't understand, even before 2020 really happened, what I'm going to, it's beyond the scope of this discussion today. But as soon as Tina Peters was elected, there was already efforts that started immediately in order to get her removed because she had entered into a position that did not expect her to win. She was an outsider, and in many ways it's similar to Trump, and they were intent on making sure that they could continue their election cabal with some of these companies and these individuals who were surrounding her in the clerk's office, going up all the way through the attempt to recall her well before 2020, starting in 2018. And there's a lot that people don't understand just how much Tina Peters was dealing with. Because for most people, and largely because of the media on both sides, the story for Tina really starts with the 2020 election. And there's a lot more history to that. We're not going to get into that, but I do want to start, just so we jump into this interview. You asked, do you have personal knowledge whether the election system in the U.S., the voting systems can be manipulated by foreign agents? He answered, yes, they can be manipulated by foreign agents or third parties. He was the national coordinator for the data situation rooms or war rooms for the Venezuelan government. And then he, of course, mentioned some of the capabilities of this software. This includes altering ballot images. These are things that were known through the Dominion manuals that others have come out and validated, at least as far as the technology goes. Some of the patents, including those tied back to Eric Coomer, some of the history between Sequoia and Smartmatic and Dominion has, of course, been fleshed out by American citizens. But we haven't really had someone who's come forward and said, I was in on it. This individual came and stated under oath to you that he was involved, that he was knowledgeable. He expressed intimate knowledge of the systems from an engineering standpoint and their capabilities, and the fact that those same vulnerabilities go into Dominion, and of course, specifically to the Mesa County image, which we'll talk a little bit more about as well. Those images were present, and that the trusted build that Tina Peters did an image of before they wiped the entire thing. The biggest thing that I really think this speaks to, which was done such an injustice to Tina by the judge and the way that her case was allowed to be presented, was this double standard, excuse me, where in sentencing, the judge railed on her. And this doesn't even speak yet to the constitutional issues like her free speech and some of the things that are being raised right now in the court with Judge Varhalik. But the information that was available to her and to others, information that others had brought to her, and the actions by the Secretary of State and others surrounding her regarding the elections led her to make an image. But in the courtroom, they said, no, we're not here to talk about elections. Judge Barrett made it very clear, no, we're not talking about that. We're here because of Tina Peters' misconduct and identity theft. But then as soon as it gets to sentencing, as soon as it gets to the public, how they perceive it, he was very explicit. You undermine confidence in our election systems. You undermine confidence in the government. Your voice is a danger. Her motives, which were never able to be articulated within the courtroom, are very much vindicated, on top of a large amount of evidence that we already have speaking to that.
That's true. So the judge who sentenced Tina Peters to 9 years in prison and denied her bond on appeal said that her criticism of the voting system was lies, and those lies made her a danger to the community. And on that basis, he denied her bond on appeal. What this interview with this witness shows is that Tina's criticism of the voting system was the truth. It wasn't lies, it was true. And therefore, she should be released immediately from custody.
This is on page 24, but it's all in the video that everyone's going to watch. Did you review the forensic image of the Mesa County election management server from the November 2020 election? Yes. What did you find? And essentially, he says that the systems have vulnerabilities. They can be used to attack the system. Source code is not 100% obfuscated or hidden. You asked him, can any election be run securely using Dominion software? Dominion is full of bugs. They've had many years to correct them. They haven't done so. This, of course, even goes back to the lack of certification of the machines going back to 2017, I believe it was. And, you know, that's a point that was always glossed over. There's also source code requirements for that to be turned over to states, in many states in the country. That was never done. And they've run this idea that we have proprietary source code. But this individual, having an engineering background with these, said the reason those errors are intentionally there is because they need it. They need them. Is it possible to have a secure election? Yes, but the current voting software Dominion uses does not provide this, cannot ensure an election cannot be manipulated, because not knowing how their system works, that means either an engineer or a technician working for Dominion that has even better knowledge than we have can use his or her system to manipulate the votes. This can be done remotely, and it can be done from, like for instance, this Serbian office of Dominion, where they have a team of engineers, according to one of the previous interviews we had with Gary Bernstein.
Yes, that's a very good point. One of the things that I learned from this witness, which I had not known before, is this man in the middle. It's like an app. I'm not a technical person, so I may not explain this correctly if your audience has a lot of technical knowledge.
There will be some that might understand. I'm not exactly a technical wizard, but you know what he was essentially saying there are multiple ways to get in. And of course, these were things that were shown, you know, going up to the 2020 election, things that Tina Peters and others were raising concerns about. They had instances in multiple counties, multiple states in the country before then, during the 2020 election, and also during midterms and going up to 2024, where Dominion came in, remotely accessed systems, and this hypothetically couldn't have been done because they were running the idea that they're not connected to the internet. When he was talking about man in the middle, he was essentially, it is one method talking about setting up a VPN. And he mentioned this with other systems, not just the ones that we were talking about in the United States.
You can get into the voting system undetected and change the outcome of an election undetected. The system is susceptible to that. So the statements that Tina was making about the susceptibility of the system were true.
Well, and I believe there was actually record of the Secretary of State. Specifically, there had been a breach of passwords. And this witness actually describes that this is a bug in the system that allows, you know, the passwords basically to remain on there unencrypted, which allows somebody to come in and essentially get the passwords to get into the machines remotely. It makes it easier for them. I believe there was actually communication showing that they were aware that in the Mesa County Clerk's office, there was someone communicating. They were aware of an issue regarding the passwords being breached, and I believe they stated they were affected, but they did not alert the counties. Now, how you can have this double standard where Tina Peters gets prosecuted for making an image that contains evidence of fraud, and the fact that they illegally altered the voting machines and the management server, altered settings, changed structure, and then of course erased log files. These are crimes regarding to information that is required to be preserved, And yet we're still told that we have the safest, most secure elections.
The point that's often overlooked, which we were not allowed to present to the jury at trial, is that Tina Peters had a duty under 52 U.S. Code 20701 to preserve the election records of Mesa County, including the digital records that were contained on the hard drives of the voting system computers in Mesa County. It was her duty to preserve that data for 22 months. She learned that the so-called trusted build, which should be renamed the wipe, she learned that the trusted build was going to destroy her ability to audit the November 2020 general election and to audit the April 6, 2021 Grand Junction municipal election. So she thought that her paramount duty was to federal law. And so what she did is engaged a computer cyber expert, Conan Hayes, to image the system before the evidence was destroyed by the Secretary of State. And then after the Secretary of State erased all of the election data in the system, then this consultant made a second image of the system, of the hard drive, and that second image showed that all of the data had been erased and the only thing left on the system was the new software. So when a person gets a Windows update for their computer, the update doesn't destroy all their data, it just makes an update to the software and the system continues to run using the same data. The data is not wiped out when the way you update a computer, it doesn't wipe the data. But the way the Secretary of State and Dominion voting systems updates the voting system, it wipes out all the data that federal law requires to be preserved.
But what it really comes down to is Tina Peters did her job. That's all she did. And she did so oftentimes being fought with not much more than COVID guidance. She simply did her job, preserved records that she was required to by law. Tina Peters made Mesa County the only one that was, I suppose technically in accordance with the law after the 2020 election, after the Secretary of State's actions. And because of that, she's been turned into a monster. You have an innocent woman who is sitting in prison. She's been in there for a year now. As you mentioned earlier, not a fun prison, not a Martha Stewart prison, but a real one with some very bad people around her.
Yeah, her cell, by the way, is 7 feet by 10 feet with a 6-foot double, two-tier bunk. So her roommate sleeps on the top and Tina sleeps on the bottom bunk. And it is so narrow when you include the bunk and the desk that's in there, that when Tina wants to go out the door to use the restroom, her roommate has to get into bed, so there'll be room for Tina to get between the bunk and the desk to get out the door. It's pretty awful. And she's 70 years old and not in good health.
Yeah.
And they have refused to give her a mattress that that would accommodate her fibromyalgia condition, which she has as the result of multiple rear-end collisions where she was rear-ended by somebody else. So she has ongoing musculoskeletal issues and pain because of that.
Yeah, it's been a real challenge for her to be in there.
One of the most inspiring things is that, to me anyway, is that this woman who should be portraying herself as a victim is inspiring. I mean, I went down there the next to last time that I visited her in Pueblo. And Tina asked me, do you have any good news for me? And I said, I wish I did, but I don't. All I can tell you is that generally, I think things are going well, but we don't have any news from the court, and we don't have any news regarding any other way to get you released. And Tina could see how badly I felt, because really I was quite discouraged at that point. And so she said this beautiful prayer for me and the legal team and for our families. She knows my wife, and you know, she said a prayer for all of us that are trying to help her. It was quite moving.
Yeah, she's an amazing woman. Every time, you know, she has some bad days, and it's more like irritation, like, oh,
Yes.
this, you know, these ladies in here, I just don't understand why they act that way. But you know, she's never once said anything cruel to anybody.
Yeah.
She literally has had her life ripped apart. She's been separated and isolated from her family. She's had her name dragged through the mud. She's you know, just for doing her job. And most of the times that we talk, and you know, so many others, she ends up praying for you or praying for somebody else, or you know, talking about the blessings that she has and how much she wants to help other people. She's talked to us so many times about how she wants to help the people who are in prison.
Well, that's true. She prays for the inmates that
Yeah.
she lives with.
She's Tina Peters is the last person on Tina Peters' mind, even sitting in prison now for a year. And I want everyone to know too, this is, you know, it's difficult, and there's been obviously a lot of Tina's name going around. I'm not going to, you know, get into anything specific, but Tina has a lot of legal bills and a lot of expenses that have not been paid. John, I know you're one who I believe went without getting paid for about a year, and but I mean there's several $100,000 that Tina Peters still owes before even Peter Tickton came on and joined the legal team. So I want to interject right now. If you guys can support her, Tina Peters does need your help. And if you can go on her website, tinapeters.us, you'll find there's a link for her legal defense fund. I know it hurts because a lot of us have had very tough times the last few years, and there's been a lot of people that we've been giving to, but Tina Peters is someone who really has given everything for the American people and for all of us, and just for truth. I mean, even the name of her show, The Truth Matters. You know, she never asked for any of this. She got elected and she simply did her job. And she's paid an enormous price. So if any of you can help her, but we have some really amazing attorneys and people on this team, and a lot of amazing people. And, you know, they still need to be able to feed their families too. And Tina doesn't have anything left. There's a few people who are supporting her, and we're blessed by God that we have such amazing attorneys working to fight for her right now, and so many of you who can help spread the word. But please, if you can't support her, or if all you can do is share, I just ask you to do that, because Tina deserves it. And you know, it's not right what they've done to her. And if they can do this to Tina, they can do it to any of us. There was, of course, some other individuals regarding their involvement with these Venezuelan, I'll just call it cartels. That's what these are. These are transnational cartels who have made a business out of stealing elections and using American tax dollars, you know, I might add, because we love to pay for our own destruction, apparently. But you have some of these names who I believe are still involved. 3 I know in specific, Robert Moreno, Robert Morales, and then Hyder Garcia, who still is active in the United States and in Texas. This witness mentioned them specifically, their involvement in some of these systems and some of these organizations.
Yes, the witness testified that all of these people were involved in the 3 names that you mentioned, Mr. Moreno, Mr. Morales, and Mr. Garcia, when they were in Venezuela, they were involved in rigging elections there. Mr. Morales and Mr. Moreno, according to the witness's testimony, were software engineers who designed the system so that false votes could be injected into it due to the susceptibilities in the system. The tool that was used in Venezuela is he described as a data utility tool. And the way it worked is it was set up on a separate computer that wasn't part of the voting system, but this separate computer had a program using the data utility tool that had all of the passwords and all of the certifications necessary to enter the voting system. And it could pretend to be, it mimicked a computer or set of computers, multiple computers in the voting system. And then that tool could actually penetrate the voting system, inject false votes, and leave undetected. Nobody would know that the system had ever been penetrated by this data utility tool or that false votes had been injected. And he described it as, the witness described it as having a key to a house. You have a key to someone else's house, you use the key to open the door, you enter the house, you do what it is that you came to do, and then you leave, and there's no evidence that you were there. And these three people, Mr. Moreno, Mr. Morales, and Mr. Garcia, all ended up working not for Smartmatic anymore in Venezuela, but working for Dominion Voting Systems in the United States.
I'll summarize, what you just said on top of everything that we've discussed. I mean, we have again, I'll describe it as a transnational cartel that has developed, and I would say relatively perfected, a technology to steal elections, marketed that technology with US tax dollars, imported it into the United States, and then not only that, essentially brought in their agents to be involved in, and promote and manage and run some of these systems. How much of this would we have had evidence of if it were not for what Tina Peters did, and for the image that she made of Mesa County? And there are so many people who are involved with this on record in multiple states in elected positions who have 100% committed federal crimes, state crimes. None of them are in prison. But Tina Peters is denied bail now for a year.
Well, you made a great point, and that is the witness testified that he had examined the image that Tina Peters preserved, or both images that she preserved, the before and after, and that in the before image, he could see that the software used by Dominion in Mesa County had many of the same susceptibilities and vulnerabilities as the Smartmatic software that he was familiar with in Venezuela.
In regards to your question that you asked him about examining the election management server that was taken after the trusted build. And he said, no, we saw both images, the old one and the new one. And the structure had changed. The structure of the program changed as compared to version 5.5, whereas they upgraded to this 5.11. And then he also stated that, yes, whoever gave the authorization for the system to be updated would be the person responsible for all the files being deleted. If this person with the green light was the Secretary of State, it would be the Secretary of State who was responsible for ordering election files and records that were required to be preserved by law to be deleted. This was proven.
Well, we know from the evidence at trial that was presented by the government that it was an employee of the Secretary of State who actually wiped the hard drive of the Mesa County voting system. That was an employee of the Colorado Secretary of State.
There were admissions in there that essentially, during her trial, that Tina Peters acted in good faith in accordance with what I'll just call regulation. and her requests for IT help, for instance, were not honored. They were not responded to, and the individuals who should have had who should have done that, who should have assisted her, they denied her request, and they in fact violated law.
Well, you brought up a great point, and this was in the evidence that was presented at trial. And that is, before the Secretary of State came out to wipe the hard drives of the county voting system and install new software, Tina Peters acknowledged to the IT department, I can't remember the person's title who testified at trial, but Tina Peters asked that IT director if IT would provide a computer expert to observe the process that the Secretary of State was going to perform on the Mesa County computers. She asked the IT department to provide an expert. Actually, she asked for 2 IT experts, one Republican, one Democrat. And the witness testified at trial that they had 17 IT employees, but they couldn't spare one to observe this process that was going to be performed by the Secretary of State. The witness's name was Lana Jordan.
A lot of this information people have heard before and in various ways. What is unique today, sitting here, and what the audience is about to see is somebody real who has very real experience, has testified under oath. According to his testimony, has been speaking with people in the Department of Justice since last year, for about 18 months ago now. This is real. This is someone who has key experience, who has been involved in specifically rigging elections, specifically using this software, and has knowledge of people who are currently involved in elections processes in the United States.
Yes, one reason I think that this witness testimony is so important is that he is, first of all, a computer technology and elections systems expert. No question about his ability, and you can see it in his careful and accurate responses to the questions in the transcript. This is not somebody who is here to present a right-wing challenge to the 2020 election. He's not a hired gun expert. He's not an American. So his testimony is unique for that reason. So far, the only experts that I had talked to about these issues with the computer voting system were all born in the US, educated in the US, trained in the US, and were very strong in their opinions that the voting system was susceptible. But they were all disbelieved by and attacked by mainstream media for their opinions. This person is not one of them. This witness was trained in Venezuela. He was in on the rig from the beginning. He knew about the creation of software through the Smartmatic company. That Smartmatic received $250,000, this is what the witness testified to, from the Venezuelan government. In exchange for that loan, the Venezuelan government received 28% ownership of one of the corporations. There were 2 corporations, Bizda and Smartmatic, according to the witness. And they were really one and the same company with just 2 different branches. And the Venezuelan government received a 28% ownership interest in Bizda. The Venezuelan government is the owner of the source code for the Smartmatic software. That's what the witness testified to, which is stored in a bank vault in Caracas. So I think that's why this witness is so important and different from other experts that we have heard from. He was in on the ground floor of the elections rigging in Venezuela. He knew the people in the government. He knew the people in Smartmatic. He arranged the war rooms and situation rooms. He was in charge of the equipment that was used. He knew the system from front to back, and he knew how the elections were rigged. And we haven't heard from that kind of expert before.
The one piece of this that Dominion and the states and a lot of these supposed public servants have danced around is this private source code. We've never been able to see the source code. They keep saying, no, it's private, it's proprietary, you can't look at it, and then pretend that their audits mean anything. The source code has always been an issue. Machines from foreign nations that are not necessarily friendly. We have software from foreign nations that are certainly not friendly and not good, owned by these foreign nations. All of these vulnerabilities, and we've never seen the source code. And this witness dealt explicitly with it, helped develop it, understands it, and can point us in the right direction. So I hope that this will be fruitful and that whatever investigations are going on with this particular witness and whoever else he's working with, that the American people can get some truth, and most importantly for today's purpose, that Tina Peters could at least have the vindication that her motives were genuine and authentic. And my last question is, obviously we have this apart from all this. We could set that aside. I'll use Peters. We could put that over here. Then we have the constitutional aspect of this, which is being argued right now in her habeas, which is, she was thrown in prison, denied bail, as a punishment in the judge's own words. That is, of course, still being argued, but that is a big issue that affects all Americans, because not only do we not have a voice in our elections, but as they've shown us with Tina Peters, they have no qualms, and this judge certainly, destroying your voice, robbing you of any constitutional right that they see fit. If you step on the toes of the wizard that you're not supposed to see. So I'll let you over to that, but I think that's the piece that isn't necessarily at the heart of this information, but it's crucial to all the things that Tina did and all the reasons that she was thrown in prison.
Well, you brought up two very good points there, Apollo. The first one was that the Venezuelan government, former Venezuelan government official, testified that the Smartmatic computers, the components were manufactured in China, including the firmware, and assembled in Taiwan. So that a sworn enemy of the United States is manufacturing the firmware that went into the Smartmatic computers and that is now used in the Dominion computers. Their components are manufactured in China. The firmware comes from China and is assembled in Taiwan. The witness mentioned, it testified to those facts. So the hardware, the susceptibility of the hardware is the same in the Dominion systems that are used in the United States as it was in the Smartmatic systems that were used in Venezuela and the Philippines and other countries. The second point that you brought up is about the First Amendment issue in Tina's case. The judge, it was startling what the court said at sentencing. He said in so many words, I am putting you in prison and denying you bond because the things you say make you a danger to the community, which violates the clear case law from the United States Supreme Court and the Colorado Supreme Court. the case law that says you cannot prosecute somebody for speech. Only in the circumstance where what a person says is likely to lead to imminent violence, then you can ban it. But you can't ban speech that doesn't lead to immediate violence. And Tina's speech had nothing to do with violence. It was just criticism of the voting system.
It was procedure, transparency, accountability. That's all she said.
Tina had the guts to speak up when other people were afraid. And I thought one of the most telling comments at Charlie Kirk's memorial came from Vice President Vance, who said, there are worse things than dying. Facing a gunman is easier than living in fear that you will be prosecuted for telling the truth.
As far as free speech goes, I think this is one of the most alarming. And again, I want to thank you, John, for the work that you're doing, and for the entire team, because there's a lot of great people who are working very hard. And just the audience, I just ask you, please make sure that you share this. Tina hasn't been on her own show in quite some time. Tina asked us, please don't let my show die. She says the truth matters, and just please keep my show going so that I have a voice. Your voice is important. Right now, all of you are Tina's voice. She's had her freedom, she's had her voice stolen, and like you just said, John, explicitly for using it. So I just ask all of you, please share this information. Please pay close attention to what you're going to watch now, and pray for our country. Pray for Tina if you can support her. Support the the team, and of course the hefty legal bills that Tina still has to shoulder while she's locked up. Please go to tinapeters.us. Anything that you can help out. Tina has asked me to thank all of you in advance, and for for being patriots. So remember to use your voice. John, I'll give you the final word, and then we'll roll to the interview.
Well, thank you, Apollo, for the chance to speak for Tina. And I do this as Tina's lawyer in connection with the pending federal case to have her released on bond. And part of my representation includes the duty to present truthful, verifiable information, not only to the court, but to the public. Because our court systems are open to the public. And this evidence belongs to the public. And thank you for having me.
Amen. Thank you, John.
My name is John Case. I'm a lawyer representing Tina Peters. I'm investigating whether foreign agents manipulated computer voting systems in U.S. elections. Sir, do you have personal knowledge whether or not the election systems in the United States, the voting systems, can be manipulated by foreign agents?
The electoral systems of the United States can be manipulated by foreign agents or third parties.
Are you in danger, physical danger, if your true identity is known?
Yes.
In order to protect your safety, have you and I agreed that your identity will be redacted in the final transcript of your testimony, and that your face will be disguised and your voice will be altered by technology?
That is correct.
Have you received any money or thing of value in exchange for your testimony today?
No, not at all.
Have you been promised any money or thing of value in exchange for your testimony today?
No, not at all.
Can you tell us about your expertise in voting system computers?
I have 20 years of experience in electoral systems. Experience comes from Venezuela from 2003 onward, where we received for the first time and we configured the Smartmatic systems for the first time in Venezuela. We configured the transmission systems and the tally systems. I was the national coordinator for voting machines. I was the national coordinator for national data, and I worked in the creation of situation rooms or war rooms for the Venezuelans.
You were the national coordinator for data situation rooms or war rooms for the Venezuelan government?
Yes, I was a person in charge in the situation rooms for the Venezuelan government.
Is the situation room called a war room?
That is correct.
Who was present in the war room during an election?
The President of the Republic, the Vice President, they could either be there in person or via call. The main ministers of the country are there, and the President of Congress, or what is called the National Assembly. In the specific case of Venezuela, it would be Diosdado Cabello, Jorge Rodriguez, Delcy Rodriguez, Rafael Ramirez as the president of the oil industry. High-level military personnel. Those are the ones that are in these situation rooms or war room.
And were you personally present in the Venezuelan war room with the people that you just named during elections in Venezuela?
I worked together with them from 2004 to 2016.
And when was the last time that you were in the war room in Venezuela during an election? What year was that?
2015.
Briefly describe your expertise in computer technology.
My high school degree is T degree. That's how we call it in Venezuela. Aside from that, I went to the university to study telecommunications. Even though I didn't end up graduating on that, I studied telecommunication, business administration, and journalism. I'm knowledgeable regarding programming systems, operating systems such as Windows, Linux, and in telecommunications in general to be able to transmit the votes.
What were you responsible for doing in Venezuelan elections between 2003 and 2016?
I was responsible for configuring the voting equipment. I was responsible for configuring the electoral manager system, responsible for the transmission systems, responsible for the electoral system audits, along with the Carter Center and the European Union. On top of that, I was, after that, responsible for the data centers, where we keep all the information of the voter records, biometric systems, and the electoral systems for an election day. Counselor, this is the interpreter. The interpreter was somewhat unclear in the last answer of the witness, whether he meant the election systems, where we keep the election systems that were used during election days, prior election days, or to be used for future election days.
Can you ask him that, please?
I meant the general system where you keep the backups for prior elections and where you would set up future elections. So in the case of Venezuela, the system is centralized in one place. It's very similar to what is done here in the United States, except for that each county has its own system and they operate very much independently. In Latin America, our countries have just a single voting system. In the United States has over 3,000.
Are you familiar with a ministry in Venezuela called the National Electoral Council?
Yes, I was an employee of the National Electoral Council.
And was it as an employee of the National Electoral Council that you set up the war room to manage the elections in Venezuela?
That is correct.
Did you also set up or direct others under your supervision to set up situation rooms in the states throughout Venezuela?
Correct. We would create manuals so that they can replicate the rooms and then send over the data to the main room.
So each state in Venezuela had its own situation room where election data would be transmitted to the war room. Is that correct?
Each individual monitors his state and then sends over the status to the main room. That's why you have the ministers for the administration in each one of the different rooms, because each minister is responsible for a certain number of states in the country.
Were the results of elections manipulated in Venezuela while you worked for the National Electoral Council?
That is correct.
How were election results manipulated?
In the case of 2004, 1 million fake voters were inputted into the system, into the record of voters. And then the electoral system was used in order to designate who each citizen had voted for. Sorry, the interpreter would like to make a correction. And the electoral system was used to determine who each citizen had voted for, that the government later on used to be able to persecute those that were not within its ranks. In 2006, a tool was used. The tool was called SAES, AES Data Util.
Can you explain how SAES works?
SAES Data Util is a tool that allows you to do a general test of the entire electoral system. In order for you to test the entire system, you need to input the different credentials and also the certifications for the particular election. And this tool allows you to emulate voting machines in order to then transmit the votes.
Was SAES used in Venezuela to manipulate the outcome of elections, to change the results?
That is correct. It is used by the technology directors. In this case, his name, Ardo Hernandez. Later on, it was used by Diosdado Cabello's cousin. His name is Luis Campos Cabello.
And how did they use SAES to manipulate Venezuelan elections?
By using a statistical system, knowing the elector's behavior, without exceeding a maximum of 2 or 3% of vote manipulation, while at the same time taking over a large number of voting machines that you need in order to change the total amount of votes that you need to modify. So specifically in the year 2008, the technology director for the National Electoral Council was in charge of transmitting the data from an entire state so that his relatives could win. And this can be corroborated because in the transmission system, the telephone companies have to show that all the voting machines issue the transmissions through the official channels. And a red flag came up that that particular state, that's the state of Merida, had not issued its transmission yet. So it issued a red flag in order for it to be determined whether there was a failure or an error. And so the National Center of Tallying, or the Adjudication Center, responded that the entire state's data had already been transmitted. Yet there was no traceability, no trace that showed that the state had transmitted the data through the regular transmission channels. So the solution was to have all the different pieces of equipment retransmit. But nevertheless, that would not change the the final tally because the tally was already there. And all the technical reports regarding these errors or failures were handed over to the military personnel. So they used SAIS data utility tool to transmit the entire information for the entire date because you can use it to transmit correctly all the state's data. This is supposed to be a tool that for its normal usage is supposed to allow you to test the integrity of a system. For when it's misused, it can allow you to inject votes without people knowing you did so.
I need to interrupt and point out that when the witness says size, it's an abbreviation, SAES.
Gotcha.
And can you tell us what SAES stands for?
It's automated system of elections or something similar. It's like a centralized electoral system. It stands for automated system of elections or something like that. That applies for the entire line of products from the Smartmatic company. Every product is called SAIS. So in Venezuela, we had SAIS 3000, 3300, SAIS 4000, and in the United States, they used SAIS 3367 for the Chicago, Illinois machine where President Obama in the 2006 elections cast his vote.
Is there a data utility feature of SAES?
So there's a tool. Aside from the system itself, there's a tool called SAIS Data Util that allows me to test the entire system. In general, any company providing election systems needs to have such tool because they need to be able to prove the integrity of the system.
Can the SAES data utility tool be used to manipulate election results?
That is correct.
How does that work?
So in the case of Venezuela, this tool has been designed for the SAIS system. So now if my system is integrated with an external system, I have to then adapt my tool to be able to test all the elements of my system plus the elements of the other system that is being integrated with my system. Well, then this happened in 2005 when Smartmatic of Venezuelan government, who owns the source code, the source code belongs to the government, made an integration with the American company called Sequoia voting systems when it was acquired in the year 2005. To then bring to pass the elections, carried out the elections in Chicago, Illinois in 2006. Then lending or selling its technology to Dominion voting systems in the year 2010. Meaning that I need to have a tool to test the integrity of the system, and I adapt that tool to the different integrations. So that's why I'm saying that you would adapt the tool to each one of the systems, because each system has a different way in which it writes to the databases and different processes.
Is auditing an election part of the Smartmatic software?
That is correct. And it varies by state and country. And also, when you audit an election or when you audit a system, you will be auditing only that which the company wants you to see or what the electoral body wants you to see. In other words, it's not like the audit is like an open audit. Only the modules and the functions that the public needs to know are audited. That is why you have been unable to detect whether a library has been hidden, has been locked, or if it can be manipulated. You are not auditing tools like this one either, like SAIS Data Utility, which are tools that allow you to inject votes. So people end up not knowing what the tool's actual purpose or utility is.
So if an audit discovers a problem, was there a strategy of how to explain that to the public?
No, because you would never show the public the errors of the system. You would only show the functionality of it. That you could find out who people voted for. And by 2005, there was a modification made, but that was the only thing.
What was the role of human error in terms of public relations? How did human error figure into the public relations of Smartmatic?
When any company, and this doesn't just apply to Smartmatic, and when any company mentions human error, what you're doing is you're putting the responsibility or the blame on a person and not on the system itself. It's easier for me to fire somebody from a company and then pay them their severance package as compared to me losing my entire business because my electoral system or the system that I am selling has errors. I would end up losing everything. That's why you can read up how all these different electoral companies are always alleging human errors here and there. Therefore, for any type of manipulation of elections, you need to have the company to provide the service because they are the ones that know how their own system works. They know how to make an injection into the system in an undetectable manner so that when detailed audit of the election is performed, any sort of trace.
Is this SAES data utility similar in its security to a key to a house?
That is correct. This tool allows you to emulate a voting machine. It allows you to emulate multiple voting machines. The original machine is not transmitting, but I'm emulating this machine, and I'm transmitting whatever data I need to be transmitted. In the case of Venezuela, the machines that would be transmitted, or the data of the machines that would be transmitted, were the machines that were not going to be audited.
So in the case of Venezuela, was the SAES data utility used to transmit fictitious votes?
That is correct. That's the function for which the Venezuelan government would use that tool for.
How was the Venezuelan government involved in developing the Smartmatic software that was used to run Venezuelan elections?
Their involvement was 100%. The software was created by the Venezuelan government. Historically speaking, the government financed Smartmatic for it to create the software. This is obvious and public information based on the audits that the European Union did of the elections of 2004. And the president of Smartmatic, Antonio Mujica, he informed the European Union that the source code was property of the National Electoral Council.
What is the connection between Dominion voting systems, Sequoia voting systems, and Smartmatic? How are those three entities related?
So Smartmatic purchases Sequoia in 2005. So the SAIS software is implemented for the elements of Sequoia. From 2007 to 2013, Sequoia and Dominion worked for the elections in the Philippines. And that relationship allows Dominion to purchase Sequoia in 2010. Therefore, the SAIS election software from Smartmatic ended up being implemented in Sequoia and later on transferred to Dominion. And you have two engineers there. Their names are David Moreno and Ronald Morales, which were the ones that handled the integration of the software belonging to Smartmatic, called SAIS, and integrated it into Sequoia. And then these very same engineers did the integration from Sequoia to Dominion in the year 2010. Currently, these engineers still work for Dominion, and they are in charge of their software.
Where is the worldwide global headquarters for Dominion Voting Systems, Inc.?
They have three headquarters: the United States, Canada, and Belgrade, Serbia. It is in Serbia that they develop the programs that are then implemented here in the United States. Ronald Morales is the person in charge of configuring the entire security network so that these three different headquarters can communicate between themselves. At that point in time, they used initially VPN networks. And during the days that the American elections were held, Serbia is the office that is responsible for resolving the errors that pop up in the systems.
Is it possible for engineers in Serbia working for Dominion voting systems to inject votes into an election in the United States of America?
Though I don't have evidence of that, it is possible. If I happen to have access, remote access to the system, I can make changes in the electoral systems.
And would that be by using the SAES data utility tool?
No.
Then how would it be done?
Well, we need to understand something. Let's not, end up marrying this tool name, but rather its functionality. So what this tool does, SAES data util, it uses the libraries for the electoral system that were first used in Venezuela, then transferred over to Sequoia, and then finally to Dominion. It uses system bugs or errors. Let's call it the libraries. Libraries for data transmission, data encryption libraries, the communication bridges between the databases. So what SAES data utility does is that it takes the credentials or passwords for an election so that the system can authorize it to connect itself. And then it can inject as many votes as it needs to. If the Dominion systems have bugs in their libraries, then in turn I can use those bugs while having the correct credentials or passwords and use the processes of the same system to then inject the votes that are needed. Whether it be images, data, or votes, whatever the system allows me to do, I will be able to do it while using those libraries.
Did you review the forensic image of the Mesa County election management server from the November 2020 election?
I did.
And what did you find in your examination of that forensic image?
That the electoral systems of Dominion have vulnerabilities that can be used to attack the system. Its source code is not 100% obfuscated or hidden. The use and handling of passwords they're all stored in plain text, which allows you to get that data from the database. You can get it from the backups of the different elections, from the settings files of an election, and from the button device that allows you to have access to the equipment because the credentials are also stored in the button itself. So once you have that information, and if you know how the system operates, then you can attack the encryption libraries, which then literally allows you to manipulate the system and change votes at will. Additionally, or on top of that, the Windows operating system has in turn vulnerabilities and can also be attacked. Using an error code, it's called the Eternal Blue. It's an attack system that even the entity, the NSA, uses here in the United States.
Now, after the 2020 election, we were told by the Attorney General of the United States that the 2020 election was the most secure in history. We were also told by the Colorado Secretary of State that the Colorado computer voting system is the gold standard for running elections. Can you tell us if that is true? Are our elections in the United States and in Colorado really secure?
No, they are not secure.
Can any election be run fairly and securely using Dominion software, which is so susceptible to manipulation?
Well, we have to keep something in mind or understand something clearly. No system is infallible. Dominion's software is a software that has a lot of errors or bugs, and they've had many years to correct them, and they haven't done so. From an IT standpoint, you could even say that the types of errors that they have made are very basic. But the reason why those errors are intentionally there is because they need it. Now, can they be cured in the future? Of course they can. Is it possible that you can have a secure election using electronic voting systems in the future in the United States? Of course. But the current software that Dominion Voting Systems is using right now does not provide, they cannot ensure that an election cannot be manipulated. Because if we, not knowing how their system worked, were able to detect the bugs, that means that either an engineer or a technician working for Dominion that have even better knowledge than that we have can use his or her system to manipulate the votes as needed. And it can be done without being detected.
Have you understood all of my questions as translated by the interpreter?
That is correct.
Did you answer all questions truthfully?
Totally truthfully.
I'm here because my client Tina Peters was prosecuted by the state of Colorado for criticizing the voting system. There is evidence that Dominion Voting Systems demanded that Tina Peters be prosecuted because she criticized the voting system and made a forensic image of the election management server. In your experience as part of the Venezuelan government, were you aware of the Venezuelan government prosecuting people who criticized the Smartmatic computer voting system?
Yes, they have been prosecuted. People have been prosecuted for criticizing the voting system.
Did Smartmatic participate in helping the government prosecute those people who criticized the Smartmatic voting system?
Yes, the electoral technology companies have to turn over evidence as requested by the government.
And in your experience, were the judges who oversaw those prosecutions able to know if the evidence provided by Smartmatic was true or false?
No, they do not have that capacity. They would have to be specialists in technology to know stuff.
So the judges in Venezuela had to rely on the witnesses provided by Smartmatic in the prosecution of people who criticize the voting system?
Them or the government, correct.
Now, when you worked for the Venezuelan government between 2003 and 2016, did you meet with any officials who were from Cuba?
On many occasions.
And how is it that you met with Cuban officials on many occasions in your role in managing the Smartmatic voting system in Venezuela?
Well, this is because the Cuban officials or Cuban authorities are part of the Venezuelan government. They have full oversight of the activities carried out by the Venezuelan government and provide advice or consulting to them.
Do you know if Cuba has a communist government?
Yes, it does.
So are you saying that the Venezuelan government is managed by representatives of the Cuban communist government?
That is correct.
And do you know if the engineers for Smartmatic, who later became employees of Dominion, were trained in Cuba to write election software for Smartmatic?
No, I'm not aware of that. What I am aware of is that Cuban engineers traveled over to Venezuela to obtain training as far as technology was concerned, not only electoral technology, but also for public records such as birth certificates, but to receive training in biometric technology, passports, and to implement Cuban systems within the government. When I refer to Cuban systems, I'm referring to telecommunications and intelligence systems. And what they would explain to us was that given the blockade or embargo that they are going through, they don't have access to those tools that Venezuela ended up giving them. But as far as elections are concerned, or electorally speaking, all the technicians or engineers that created the elections system have all graduated from a Venezuelan university called Simon Bolivar University.
Now, when you were working for the Venezuelan government between 2003 and 2016, was part of your responsibility to manage the manufacturing of the voting equipment?
Well, the manufacturing of the voting equipment, these were manufactured in Taiwan and China. My responsibility was to receive those components or those pieces of equipment, configure them, and send them out to production for to be used during the elections. Meaning that any part or piece that was given to me was exported from either China or Taiwan.
Did that include firmware in the computers?
They would already come pre-configured from Taiwan or China, because it has already been established based on the part that you acquire. Okay. And if there's any modification made to them, then the engineers of Smartmatic would be the ones to do so, or if it would be the case, another company, like in the case of Dominion. But based on my experience, the components are first tested in the warehouse where they have been manufactured, which means either in China or Taiwan.
What is firmware?
The firmware is a program that is included inside a chip or a particular device for the correct functioning of an entire device. It's the first electrical impulse that the computer received, so that then after that it can, only after that it can start receiving the instructions from the operating system.
So firmware is a set of commands embedded in the hardware, and those
That's
commands
correct.
and those commands that were used in Smartmatic computers were installed in either China or Taiwan.
That is correct, but you don't want to be mixed up though, and mix this up with the electoral system. The electoral system later on needs to be set up on this equipment. So the electronic devices have some certain command sequences, and that is what we're calling firmware. Part of that are memory sequences that allow you to receive video or print, that later on allows you to receive other information. It is later, after this, that you install the electoral management system, the electoral system. That has a command sequence where you can utilize a program or a piece of software.
Do the computers made in China and Taiwan include circuits that can communicate with the internet?
They have internal modems that allow for external communications. And it is then the responsibility of each one of the different corporations to disable those components or to leave them enabled for the elections.
Now, can the firmware keep those modems enabled even if the software commands the system to disable the modem? In other words, can you have firmware that allows the modem to remain on even when the software thinks that it's off?
Yes. Well, for that, you would need an engineer that understands the Windows pipeline system, which will allow you to block certain parameters within the system. But through the operating system, I can then enable that component. In other words, yes. The answer to your question is yes.
When did Smartmatic acquire Sequoia?
2005. Smartmatic did so during its first year of corporate existence.
And were you involved as an official of the Venezuelan government? Were you involved in Smartmatic's acquisition of Sequoia?
No.
What year did Dominion Voting Systems acquire Sequoia from Smartmatic?
2010.
Are you aware of a Smartmatic official bribing a government representative in the Philippines during an election?
Well, there is an open case. It's pending against Roger Pinate for bribery during the 2016 elections in the Philippines. I mean, I'm just talking about publicly known cases of bribery, because in Venezuela, Smartmatic worked hand in hand with the Venezuelan government. And Jorge Rodriguez would collect bribes from Smartmatic.
And Jorge Rodriguez was part of the Venezuelan government?
He's the current president of Congress in Venezuela. We call it the National Assembly. And his sister is the vice president for the country. And it is Jorge Rodriguez who hired Smartmatic or awarded the contract to Smartmatic in 2003 in order for them to develop the electoral system for Venezuela.
And how much money did Smartmatic receive from the Venezuelan government in 2003 to develop the software to rig elections in Venezuela?
250,000 American dollars. And they held 28% interest in the company.
So the Venezuelan government owns 28% of Smartmatic?
As far as publicly available information, yes, and during 2003 and 2004. Smartmatic had a sister company. It was called Vista. So Vista created the system, and Smartmatic was running the elections. And the business partners for each one of those companies are correspondingly the same person. And both of those companies were recorded or incorporated here in the state of Delaware.
Who owned the source code used in Smartmatic software?
The Venezuelan government.
And where is the source code kept?
In Venezuela, in the central bank. That's where they would keep the backups for the source code, in Caracas.
How much money per year did the Venezuelan government pay to Smartmatic after Smartmatic developed the software to rig Venezuelan elections?
Well, it varied by year. During the first year, Smartmatic received $140 million. That was in 2004.
In US dollars?
Everything is dollars. I'm only talking dollars. In 2005, Smartmatic purchases Sequoia for $17 million. So it was basically a pittance. And it was very strange because Sequoia Voting Systems was a company that had 20% of the market share of the United States market.
And so from the $140 million that Smartmatic received from the Venezuelan government, then did Smartmatic pay bribes out of that money to officials in the Venezuelan government?
That is correct.
And how do you know this?
In 2004 was when the first elections machines were purchased in Venezuela. The contract for the first batch of machines, contract for $40 million, authorized by Jorge Rodriguez. And then Olivetti, after a scandal became public, goes ahead and publishes the real cost of those machines in Italy, which was $21 million. Okay. So add another $19 million on top of that. Those were to pay bribes to the people within the Venezuelan government. And this was explained by Jorge Rodriguez himself in a meeting where I was present. because I worked there. We were the part of the technical team from the National Electoral Council for the coordination of all the elections.
I want to ask you a few questions about log files. Can you tell us what a log file is?
A log on an IT level and anywhere is a record of what each one of the machines is doing. It's the absolute evidence that a machine has performed a certain process. And that record must be maintained in order for you to be able to verify if any sort of equipment is functioning appropriately. This not only applies to a piece of equipment, but also to a system, to a piece of software. Because you have operating system logs that tell you about the components within the machines, and they are system logs, which inform me about the behavior of the system. If my computer or electoral system uses systems, I will have 7 different logs.
Did the Smartmatic computer voting system, was the operating system Windows?
For the voting machines, yes, it was Windows. The tally system or vote counting system had been built on Linux, but it doesn't mean that because you have a change in the operating system, you can't maintain the logic within the systems.
So did you examined the forensic image of the election management server that was used in the Mesa County 2020 election, correct?
That's correct.
Did you notice the settings on the size of the Windows log files in the Windows operating system?
I don't recall, but it is part of the report that we created, and I can get that to you. But I seem to remember that it was too small. The size was too small for what it needed to do. When I talk about small in size or very little space, I mean that on a programming, you assign a certain disk space or memory space for the log to be stored in. And that's going to give you an X number of lines so that a log or a record can be kept. And depending on what the setting is, once the log gets full, it starts rewriting over it and deleting evidence. That's why I believe their settings were too small, and we talked about this with our team, and we thought that it wasn't going to have enough space to be able to keep all the logs throughout the election. In the case of Venezuela, elections are just one day. But in the United States, elections last over 20 days. Therefore, the space allocation for the logs have to be large enough to be able to allow for the storage of all the different days or activity during the days of the election. And that evidence or logs should be kept as a backup in a database. Those are the standard procedures that should be followed.
Now, are you familiar with the manual for the Dominion voting system?
Yes, we read the voting system manual, and it has many chapters because there is a manual for each module of the system.
Now, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if I can remind you, does the Dominion voting system manual that you read with your own eyes specify to set the log file size at 20 megabytes?
I believe so.
In the event that 20 megabyte file fills up with information, then does the Dominion manual allow you to designate what should happen next when that file gets full?
It does not say so because the Dominion's manual only tells you how to set that setting. The manual has no instructions on how to solve problems that could occur during a given election. For you to verify that a log record has been poorly configured is for someone to point out that the log files have been rewritten. But I believe that in the United States, and I have read a whole deal regarding this, there is no manual for the monitoring of the electoral systems, nor does the Dominion system issue any sort of alert or notification if the system is full. If there is any error, they would have to create a support ticket and call support, and then these people would then come by either sending a technician on site or by remote support.
Now, if the voting system isn't connected to the internet, how could a Dominion technician possibly communicate and get into the system other than through the internet?
Well, then the representatives for each county have to create a VPN connection so that the representatives can then be connected to the electoral systems. As I have read in certain reports, this has happened in Chicago, Illinois, and Georgia. In the case of Georgia as well, they have set up VPN connections in order to resolve issues as far as settings were concerned or to resolve system problems. They can use a virtual machine that is put in the middle. When I say that it's in the middle, it means that over here, on one hand, you have the county's electoral system. Then you configure a virtual machine in the county that will allow for the connections to be made. And you provide it with the necessary credentials or authorizations so that the electoral system can then communicate with this virtual machine. And then the company, in turn, connects to the virtual machine. So legally speaking, they're not connected directly to the electoral system, but nevertheless, from this other system, I can effect changes in the system to update it. Either that, or I can just do a direct connection through a VPN and do all the changes that I need. You need to have one person in that county to have the authorization of the Secretary of State. That's what I think is the case based on what I have read about this, but I don't really know whether a Secretary of State is the maximum authority or not during an ongoing election.
Now, is what you just described called the man-in-the-middle program?
That is correct.
And is the man-in-the-middle system used in Venezuela?
It was not used in Venezuela because Smartmatic had full control of the election system. It was not necessary. The government was not going to sue Smartmatic since they were working for them. And just on a side note, an anecdote, the elections, the 2006 elections in the United States, in Chicago, Illinois, the proof of concept for that election was created in Venezuela in 2005. That is why a very similar piece of equipment was used. It was the size 3300. It's an identical machine. The size 3377 that were used for the elections here in the United States. So at all times was when Venezuela used as a proof of concept for the different elections that Smartmatic carried out throughout the entire world.
So are you saying that the man-in-the-middle system was used in Chicago in the 2006 election?
No, it is used currently in these last elections that you held here. Dominion has an engineer whose name is Ronald Morales. And Ronald Morales is the person that does maintenance on the electoral systems. Ronald Morales is the person that puts that man in the middle in place to be able to set up the communication from the new Dominion system, between the new Dominion system and the old Smartmatic system. But that same behavior exists elsewhere as well.
Was there a problem when the computer equipment changed and became more modern and Dominion was still running old Smartmatic based software on the new computer equipment coming out of China and Taiwan?
That is correct. They use that because they need the county to authorize certain updates on the systems. So for example, in the case of Mesa, Colorado, let's see there, it was 5.11.55. Okay, so the 2020 election was done with version 5.5. and then they updated the system to version 5.11. When they did that update, all the old data was deleted because they are overwritten. It is written on top of that. So at that point in time, you can no longer carry out a formal audit because you no longer have the original machine. All evidence, all log, all of that was deleted.
And what you just referred to is when the Colorado Secretary of State performed what's called a trusted build in Mesa County on May 25th and 26th of 2021. The Secretary of State erased all of the records of the 2020 election that was preserved on that Mesa County election management server. Is that correct?
That is correct. I didn't know the dates that you were mentioning, but yes, that is correct.
So you examined the image of the Mesa County election management server that was taken after the trusted build. Is that correct?
No, we saw both images, the old one and the new one.
Correct. In the new image, all of the data was gone except new software. True?
And the structure changed. The structure of the program changed as compared to the version 5.5.
Now, so far as you are aware, is it a law that the system must preserve the records from the previous election for a certain period of time?
I believe it's 18 months.
Well, just so the record's clear, are you aware of 52 U.S. Code Section 20701, which requires every officer of election to preserve all election records, including electronic records, for 22 months after each election?
Correct, yes, we knew that.
And based on your examination of the forensic images from Mesa County, it's your testimony that the Colorado Secretary of State erased all records of the 2020 election when they installed new software in May of 2021. Is that true?
Whoever gave the authorization, whoever gave the authorization for the system to be updated would be the person responsible for all the files that were deleted. If the person giving the green light was the Secretary of State, then it would be the Secretary of State. If it's the person that's in charge of the elections, then it would be the person that's in charge of the elections.
Now, going back to the log file size,
Okay.
what you've told us is that the Dominion system was configured so that when the log files got full, they just overwrote the information that was already in the log file. True?
Of course, these are standard settings, standard configurations.
So while the system was operating during the 2020 election, it was actually writing over the data from the election.
It rewrites the day-to-day of an election. So let's say it becomes full, then the next day gets overwritten on top of that.
And so when you have an election that lasts for several days, it becomes impossible to audit the full election because the records are being erased after they are written. True?
That is true.
And so that is a capability that is built into the Dominion software, correct? That it overwrites election records while the election is going on.
That is correct. If the machine is operational and it is operating, it will record on top of the log that is already there.
And that is part of a Dominion software that allows it to erase records while the election is going on. True?
That's correct.
And is that same capability in the Smartmatic software that was created in Venezuela to rig elections?
That's not how it was configured over in Venezuela. You had a dedicated server
just for the log.
Meaning that all the different machines or servers would send the information to one location. And there you can do a review of all the elections through all the logs stored there. It's just that in Venezuela, no one would go and want to check those logs. Interpreter would like to make a correction. In Venezuela, no one would check those logs.
Yes, can you tell us about the transmission capabilities and methods of the telecommunications system that was used in Venezuela during elections when you worked for the Venezuelan government?
So Venezuela would transmit in 3 different ways.
It could be by home telephone line, active telephone lines.
Okay.
By cellular communication, and by satellite communication. All these devices, depending on what part of the country you were in, were then connected to the voting machines through a network port, an RJ45 jack, or an RJ11 telephone jack. So through these lines, which are secured lines, all the electoral data was transferred. And this data is transmitted through the telephone lines of the carriers in the country. So in this country, it would be the equivalent of AT&T, Verizon, and over in Venezuela, we call it CAN TV. And these networks are then connected to the National Center for Tallying or Totaling. And all the electoral data is transmitted using that method of communication.
Now, you mentioned an election that was rigged in a state, I believe you said Merida, is that correct?
In Merida, Merida. So it turns out the results of the entire state of Merida were not transmitted through the regular channels of communication. They used the tool, Size Data Utility Tool, to transmit all the data from the electoral machines and transmit them to the National Center for Tallying. And this became public knowledge because when the logs for these different communications companies were checked, there wasn't any sort of trace or data packets that were being transmitted. So this triggered a red flag, and the National Tallying Center was contacted, where they said that the state of Merida had already sent the entire transmission of 100%, which is impossible because they didn't use any of the regular channels of transmission that are used during the elections or that are authorized to be used during elections. It's as if you ordered a package, and instead of it being delivered through your front door, it comes in through the window. It's the same thing, same exact thing, and this is how it happened in Venezuela. And the person responsible for doing that was Carlos Quintero. He was the technology director for the National Electoral Council. During that specific election, his sister ended up being elected as a mayor. So this whole operation was done in order for his sister to get a position within the government.
I want to ask you about some names and of persons who were involved with Smartmatic and Sequoia and Dominion, and then if you can tell us what you know about each of these persons, but please keep it to a brief summary unless I ask follow-up. Do you know Ronald Morales?
He's a Smartmatic tech who was in Venezuela, Sequoia, and in Dominion as well.
Does he currently work for Dominion?
He currently works for Dominion.
Was Mr. Morales one of the developers of the original Smartmatic election software?
That is correct.
And was that the same Smartmatic software that was used to rig elections in Venezuela?
That is correct.
Do you know David Marino?
David Moreno. The same thing goes for David Moreno. He was a specialist technician who used to be in Venezuela, then later on went to Mexico. Then in 2004, ended up being transferred over to Sequoia in 2005 when it took over and he became part of Dominion.
Is Mr. Moreno currently employed by Dominion?
He's in charge of Dominion's warehouse in Texas, if I'm not mistaken. In other words, he's the person responsible for configuring the Dominion equipment for the elections.
And this is the same David Moreno that was involved in creating the Smartmatic software that was used to rig elections in Venezuela?
That is correct.
Do you know Ron Rosania?
No.
Do you know Hyder Garcia? Hyder, Heider, Garcia, Garcia.
Yes. Heider Garcia is the person responsible for the deployment of the electoral system in Venezuela, one of the engineers that created it. Leaders and person responsible for the implementation of the SIZE system and its implementation with Dominion in the Philippines. He was the person in charge of reconfiguring the 78,000 machines that failed in the Philippines out of the error of Dominion voting systems. And I think that he's currently the person assigned to be the elections manager in Texas, the county of Dallas, Texas. He's in charge of the election.
You mentioned 78,000 machines that were used in the Philippines. Were those scanners?
This is equipment similar to the equipment that you use for your elections here in the United States. They're either similar or identical.
And those scanners were configured and programmed by Dominion voting systems?
Dominion voting systems and Smartmatic.
And what was the error in those 78,000 scanners that were used in the Philippine election?
Oh, I did not mention what that error was. It is worth noting. Those 78,000 had a failure 5 days prior to the elections. Poorly configured from the very beginning, before they had even been sent out and distributed throughout the different islands in the Philippines. Dominion never handed over the source code, which by law they should have delivered to the electoral authorities in the Philippines. So then Smartmatic had to come and reconfigure a piece of software that didn't belong to them. I think that we need to understand one thing here. The electoral system used by Smartmatic in the Philippines is the same one as in Venezuela. So what Smartmatic did was that it integrated the equipment provided by Dominion into its system. And on top of that, Smartmatic was the manufacturer for the 78,000 scanners that Dominion ended up selling to the Philippines. And so Heider Garcia went ahead and reconfigured owned equipment because the know-how about that was what was inherited from Sequoia, knowing that Sequoia has SIZE built into its system, in its core. That's how Smartmatic was able to come and resolve the problem that had been caused by Dominion without any issues whatsoever, because they were configuring their own system, basically.
And when you say that Sequoia had SIZE built into its system, did you mean that it had the SAES data utility tool built into its system?
In the case of the Philippines, yes. But you have to remember that SAES data utility tool is a tool that is outside, external to the electoral system. And the SIZE system, when we say SIZE system, we're talking about the entire electoral system.
Now, turning back to Mr. Heider Garcia, you mentioned that he was the head of elections in Tarrant County, Texas. Is that what you said?
In Dallas County. It's in Dallas, in Texas.
Thank you.
I think he's the current head of elections, the current manager of elections in the county in Texas, Dallas.
Do you know a woman named Ileana de Los Angeles?
No.
Are you aware that Hyder Garcia has been named the new president of Hart Voting Systems?
No, I did not know.
Do you know a person named Alex Soto Vasquez?
No.
Do you know a person named Victor Vasquez?
Victor Vasquez is a manager for Smartmatic. And he's currently been named as part of the bribery case in the Philippines for the 2016 bribery case in the Philippines. I just got mixed up with another guy called because Victor Lopez was the manager of a warehouse in Taiwan, and he was the person in charge of the manufacturing of the equipment. One of the people in charge of the manufacturing of the 78,000 scanners built for Dominion. That's why I got mixed up, and I apologize.
And who was Victor Lopez employed by in Taiwan?
But I can't. Employed by Smartmatic.
Do you know a person named Ed Ryan Macias?
No.
Do you know a person named Eric Coomer? Coomer.
All I know is that Mr. Coomer used to be the president of Sequoia, and then was the president of Smartmatic United States around 2005, 2006.
Do you know a person named Anselmo Valdez?
No.
Do you know a person named Hugo Carvajal?
Hugo Carvajal is or was what you call here the National Security Advisor, the National Security Advisor for President Hugo Chavez.
Do you know if Hugo Carvajal was an officer with Cuban intelligence?
He was the highest ranking intelligence officer in Venezuela. Did he have contact with Cubans? Of course, because Hugo Chavez had a relationship with Cuba. And he was involved in all the investigations against the people, or about investigating the people that surrounded the president. And Carlos Quintero, the one that committed the fraud in 2008, I mentioned this to you just a few questions back, was the second in command right under Hugo Carvajal. Hugo Carvajal placed Carlos Quintero in the National Electoral Council so that he could have control over the elections.
Can you spell Carlos Quintero? Can you spell his last name, please?
Quintero.
And your testimony is that Hugo Carvajal placed Carlos Quintero in the National Intelligence Council so that Quintero would have control over Venezuelan elections?
He placed him as the technology director so that he could have control over the elections.
Did you have personal contact with Carlos Quintero?
He was my boss.
Are you aware that Hugo Carvajal has recently pleaded guilty to a drug charge in the Southern District of New York Federal District Court?
Yes.
And are you aware that Hugo Carvajal has, as part of his guilty plea, agreed to cooperate with the U.S. Department of Justice in explaining the connection between the Venezuelan government and the drug cartels?
No, I did not know that.
Are you familiar with the Windows operating system software updates?
Yes.
And when you were in Venezuela, did you regularly supervise the implementation of the monthly, what's called the monthly Microsoft patch?
We had a team who was in charge of maintaining the operating systems updated.
What is the monthly Microsoft patch?
Well, These are different updates that the company considers are vulnerabilities, and they are forced to issue this patch to avoid their system from being penetrated maliciously. We need to understand that whenever Microsoft issues a patch or an update, is because at that point in time, other people have already been affected and their systems have been breached. These updates don't occur just because the company is preemptively issuing them as part of their normal processes. These updates happen because somebody attacked the system and somebody went ahead and reported the issue. Create a patch or an update and people do that.
Now, as the person responsible for the voting system machines in Venezuela, what was your procedure for handling the Microsoft patch?
For the elections, all the machines needed to go out having the latest updates. And then on top of that, the operating systems for the Windows-based machines would be blocked. You use an image that does not allow anyone from modifying the app. The difference with American software is that your machines are not blocked. Rather, that machines are left open, and each one of its elements or components can be accessed or used. In Venezuela, we would disable and turn off all the different processes or components that are not going to be used, that are not needed for the elections. In the United States, however, I can go ahead and install a new component right on the very day of the elections. That's why in Venezuela, if you wanted to commit a fraud, you had to use the tool size data utility tool. In the United States, all I need is to have access to the machine and know the vulnerabilities either of Windows or the electoral system. And from there, you can exert an attack that is undetectable.
In general, would you say that Smartmatic software was designed with two principles in mind? Number one, it's easy to rig elections, and number two, it's hard to audit.
That is correct.
And is the same true for Dominion software? It's easy to rig an election with it, and it's hard to audit.
That is correct.
Do you know about GEMS software? That's GEMS.
A little.
What do you know about GEMS software?
The little that I seem to remember is that they were integrated with Daewoo, the company, and their suite of products. Later on, that suite of programs were acquired by Dominion Voting Systems in 2009 or 2010. That's the only thing that I can remember right now about this GEMS company.
Now, you mentioned that elections in Venezuela were rigged using Smartmatic software. Do you know of other countries where elections were rigged using Smartmatic software?
No.
You mentioned somewhere in your testimony about IP addresses. Can you tell us a typical IP address for Taiwan?
Well, IPs go by ranges. Each country has a range. If I'm not mistaken, as part of our investigations, we would find some records of communications using IP addresses, some IP addresses from Taiwan. This was part of, they showed in the settings or configurations of the firmware. And it was either the firmware or the EEPROM memory. That's EEPROM memory, which is a temporary memory that is stored in each one of the pieces of equipment. That's what I recall right now, but I can go over the details of the investigation and maybe it will help me remember more clearly.
Can you tell us what a ballot image is, please?
The ballot image is the scanning of a voting ballot through which you all issue your vote. In interpreter notation, I would like to correct the prior translation of a temporary memory and would like to correct that to a volatile memory. This image is to be a true and correct image of the paper ballot that then later needs to be sent over to the databases for it to be stored or backed up there. And that the transmission of that image or that backup may vary by county. There are some counties that may decide to only transmit the results, and other counties that may decide to transmit both the results and the images. Nevertheless, all the images are stored in the flashcards that are in each of the election devices.
You talked about ballot images. Can ballot images be changed inside the computer?
That's correct, yes, they can.
And is that true with Dominion software?
You would have to use Dominion's software to be able to do a change or modification of the ballot images, and in order for it to be undetectable. We can also talk about more sophisticated methods of how that can be done, but yes, it's possible.
And is it possible to change ballot images inside the computer using Smartmatic software?
No. You have to remember that each system has its own structure. The structures are all similar when we're talking about different types of electoral software. What you can do is that you use the original software from the provider, you search for its vulnerabilities, and then you use it to be able to change either images or data. And when I say data, we're talking about vote tallies. What the use of the system will allow me to do is to do all of that in a way that cannot be detected, because you're using the same software to sign for content that is not the original content. And so then when you go ahead and you audit that, you have no way of showing that those pieces of data are incorrect. There's no other way unless you go and you file a case before the law, then you appear before a judge, and you get a judge to allow me to actually go and inspect the system itself. And this causes a big delay time-wise. And then this can cause the time period where I am mandated to keep information data stored. This time period can expire. And then you can delete this data because the period mandated by law has expired. And so then these companies are, of course, going to claim intellectual property rights in order to disallow any detailed inspection of their source code, because the only entity in charge of the elections is either the county or the Secretary of State.
I'd like to wrap up this examination under oath by summarizing your testimony, and if you would just answer briefly to tell me that I'm correct or incorrect.
Okay.
So, to summarize, is it true that the Venezuelan government paid Smartmatic to create software that could be used by the Venezuelan government to rig elections?
That is true.
Is it true that Smartmatic sold its software to the Venezuelan government to use in elections?
That is correct.
Is it true that you personally set up the war room with technology that was used to rig Venezuelan elections using Smartmatic software?
I would like to make a correction. The answer to the question as asked would be no. The reason we set up the war rooms was in order to monitor the election. The process of manipulating the elections is as a result of the responses that the war room receives. And then they notify the technology director of the National Electoral Council, which, according to the stories that go around, that was Leonardo Hernandez, Luis Campos Cabello, the cousin of Diosdado Cabello, or Carlos Quintero, the second in command under Carlos Carvajal. So that would be the correct way as explained. So from the situation room, we or I did not have the authority to give an order to rob an election or manipulate an election. It was the ministers or the presidents that would make the decisions in those rooms and then notify of what that decision had been. And I would like to correct something regarding the prior question, because I think I misunderstood it. The Venezuelan government gives the contract to Smartmatic for it to create the Venezuelan electoral system, called SAIS, and financed it with $250,000 US. Then the Venezuelan government paid it $140 million for them to carry out the elections. And in return of that $250,000 loan, the Venezuelan government stays or keeps the software for the elections itself, keeps it, and as well as the 28% shareholder interest of the company called Vista. And both Vista and Smartmatic have the same owners. These are sister companies set up to be able to carry out an election. I just wanted to make that clarification.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Is it true that Smartmatic then purchased Sequoia, an American company?
Yes.
And is it true that Dominion then purchased Sequoia from Smartmatic in 2010?
Yes.
Was Eric Coomer president of Sequoia when it was purchased by Smartmatic?
That is correct.
And was Eric Coomer subsequently employed by Dominion after Dominion purchased Sequoia?
That's correct.
And is it true that Dominion acquired from Sequoia the same Smartmatic software that was used to rig elections in Venezuela?
That is correct. It acquired the Venezuelan systems integrations into the Sequoia systems. You cannot say that it's exactly the same because semantically speaking, the companies are going to say that that is incorrect. These are parts of the system that are included in the new system. This is what we call the central core, the main functionality of the system.
Is it true that when you examined the forensic images of the Mesa County election management server, you saw the same security bugs you were familiar with in the Smartmatic software that was used to rig elections in Venezuela?
Same system bugs, which would be used to manipulate or change an election. And I could name what those bugs or failures were. Errors in the encryption systems. They had the source code in legible text for any programmer to be able to read. The passwords written in plain text, which allow you to breach the system easier.
Is it true that Smartmatic created a tool called SAES Data Utility, Data Util?
That is correct, and it's recorded that tool is named in the settings and configuration manuals.
And that tool was created to test the elements of the system within an election. Is that true?
That is correct. That is its main function.
But that tool can be misused to emulate a voting machine.
That is correct, to emulate multiple voting machines.
And that tool, when it's misused, can be used to rig elections that are run on Smartmatic software.
That is correct.
And is it true that SAES is the brand name for Smartmatic software?
That is correct. Smartmatic software products that belong to the Venezuelan government, that are property of the Venezuelan government.
Is it true that the SAES data utility is like a key to a house? If one has the key, one can enter the house undetected, and when they leave, no one will know they were there.
That's correct.
And is it true that the SAES data utility was used to rig election in Venezuela by injecting false ballots?
False votes. Because Venezuela does not use ballots like the United States does. They have enough similarity that they can operate in an integrated manner. In other words, they can operate jointly. But let's remember that they cannot be identical for intellectual property issues. So what we do is that we integrate the functionality of the parts that we need to use.
Since Dominion voting systems and Smartmatic software architecture are essentially the same, could a data utility tool similar to SAES data utility be misused to manipulate elections in Dominion voting system voting computers?
That is possible.
Is it true that the Venezuelan voting system created by Smartmatic used computer components manufactured in China and assembled in Taiwan?
That is correct.
Is it true that the Dominion voting system used in the United States today uses computer components manufactured in China and assembled in Taiwan?
That is correct.
Under U.S. law, is it legal or illegal to use computer components made by our enemy, the People's Republic of China, in critical infrastructure within the United States?
It's illegal.
And is it true that Dominion Voting Systems uses computers with components made by our enemy, the People's Republic of China?
It does.
And because the Dominion voting system supply chain has not been secured to ensure that there is no foreign access or compromise of the voting system, is it true that Dominion voting system computers cannot be legally certified for use in U.S. elections?
You cannot trust a system that you cannot audit. So they shouldn't be trusting companies, whatever their name is, unless they go through detailed inspection. And even more so in critical infrastructure, as is the electoral infrastructure, elections infrastructure.
The information that you've testified to today, have you ever given that information before to the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the United States?
No.
The information that you've testified to today, have you given it to lawyers for the United States Department of Justice?
But the lawyers, no. Would prosecutors be lawyers? That's
Yes.
my question. We have provided that information.
Have you given this information to investigators for the United States government?
Yes. Part of this information, part of what I have told you today.
When, what year was the first time that you gave this information to any representative of the United States government, whether they were an investigator or a lawyer or a prosecutor for the Department of Justice?
I would like to not answer that question because I don't know if I'm breaking any rules, because I may say that I have worked with some prosecutors and I may not be allowed to provide you that information here. Because just as you are in the midst of your investigation, these other people are also doing their investigation, and I don't want, to create a problem with the investigations. And why I'm answering this way is mainly because I do not know what the law says, so I prefer to err on the side of caution and not answer. I hope you understand.
I understand. Can you tell us the year that you first gave information about the
Entiendo, pero
vulnerabilities and insecurities in the U.S. voting system to any representative of the United States government, what year did you first give them that information?
The year would be 2024.
What month in 2024, please?
March. It was March or April, when individuals were notified.
After you gave this information to the United States government in March of 2024, our government went ahead and used that same voting system to run the 2024 elections. Is that correct?
I suppose that they have to validate the investigation or the information that we're presenting them with. And I believe that this delay in them not taking action with the information that we have provided them with is because they have to first corroborate each and every one of the points we have exposed or explained to them in our different reports and videos. So I cannot put into question the timing of the actions of the government entities.
Sir, have you understood all of my questions this afternoon?
100%.
Have you answered all questions truthfully?
Totally, truthfully, and only with the truth.
Were your answers based on your personal knowledge?
Personal knowledge.
Thank you very much for coming and giving us this information today.
Thank you very much.
My name is Tina Peters. According to the media, I'm a Trump-supporting election fraud conspiracy theorist, guilty of perpetuating the big lie.
And upon examining those records, there are log files that deal with adjudication. Those are gone.
It's my impression distinctly that you never took your job of clerking particularly seriously.
They're all gone? All of them?
Yes. They would have been gone if I hadn't have done a backup.
I was elected by the people of Mesa County. When I told my son that I was thinking of running for office, I had no idea at that time what that would mean.
You abused your position.
You're hurting me!
You're as defiant as a defendant as this court has ever seen.
These people are being selected, not elected.
I'm convinced you would do it all over again if you could.
And when the person's vote isn't being honored,
Then it's all just an illusion.
First and foremost, I think it is extremely concerning that an elections official from the state of Colorado is actively working to undermine confidence and spread disinformation about our award-winning voting system.
I used to back the Blues, and I always thought the sheriff's departments throughout the country were the best and everybody else were crap. Well, what they did to Tina Peters today was outrageous. When did they become a communist?
You are no hero, and you're a charlatan.
The evil these criminals have done to me and my country grieves me so. The upcoming midterm elections are always on my mind. We have to save Colorado as well as our elections. They thought by falsely accusing me and throwing me in jail and prison would finally silence me.
I raised a Navy SEAL. I'm a Gold Star mom. Lost him 4 years ago. I love this country. I believe this is our last chance to say that something has to change.
And prison is for those folks where we send people who are a danger to all of us.
What if it costs you your life?
Then I'll be with my son.
Wave night-night to Daddy. Night-night, honey. Wave night-night to Daddy. Wave night-night.